last week, somebody asked me, what motivates you? Or how would you answer this question if someone asked you, how do you get motivated? And they told me their answer first, and everything was external. And I was like, I would actually answer that very differently because I don't view what really motivates me as external things, but internal. So there's that. But more importantly, what I was thinking about this morning is, because I think we're seeing this with all of our leaders, is how how do you sustain motivation? Because I think sometimes it's easy to think about, okay, well, I want to do this thing, so it's a short-term motivator and I can get it done. But nowadays, I think with these leaders, most of them have been in these roles for a long time. There's been going through the pandemic, some of them have been there long enough to go back to the last big financial crisis. And so I don't know. So that's what I wanted to talk about, is sustaining motivation, because I think that's
Mm,
an important topic. And we kind of get there with people, but I think they're struggling.
I agree with you. I think it's a really good topic, and I think it's interesting because I do think that I think when we think about motivation, a lot of times we're thinking about like the same level of motivation, right? Like this 10 out of 10 drive. And
Right.
so we have leaders who are expecting that from themselves. They're like, I have a problem to solve and I need to like be at a 10 and I need to sustain that 10. And I think that one of the keys to sustaining motivation is realizing that not everything requires the same level of
A really
output,
good point.
right?
That's a really good point.
And so it's almost like when I look at who I'm working with right now and kind of their challenges, I'm thinking about like there's short-term things that you need to power through, right? Like just those challenges that are, I got to do this right now. So you have to find the motivation to get your team through it. But then the things that you need to sustain, I always think it comes back to, if you're really, really clear on kind of what the long-term vision is and what that purpose is, that's what you come back to when your motivation starts to wane, right? You come back to like, why am I doing this in the first place? Why does this actually matter? And
Yeah.
that can kind of help you recharge.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that too. And I think that's a really good point, that it's almost, and I know Ariana talks about this cycle where you can be on the gas pedal and then you have to do the recovery part. And I think that so many of us are not good at the recovery part. Um, I think it's just conditioning probably, but
Right.
the recovery part isn't, I don't think, I don't think you can sustain being on the gas pedal for like 90% and 10% recovery.
Mhm.
I think you can maybe do that for short bursts, but you've got to at some point have them be more in balance, wouldn't you think?
I do. And like, also, let's be honest about this. Like, I think motivation goes hand in hand with the like, I'm working so hard gold star thing, right?
Right.
People feel like they're rewarded for going really, really hard. And so if we were to say like I have days where I literally am not motivated and I don't want to do anything and I don't really feel like I can do anything. And so my choices are like, I got to grind, I got to go, which is the old way of doing things, right? Like I got to be on all the time. I got to sustain that motivation all the time. Or I can say, wow, I'm not feeling it at all. Today might be a day where I need to give myself a rest and like be okay with that actually.
Right.
And so I think the key in part to sustaining motivation is to honoring when you're not motivated and not demanding yourself to be motivated all the time, which is so countercultural, right?
Oh, totally. But that's such a good point. And so I think that oftentimes we're holding up mirrors to people, and I don't know, I found myself giving people permission sometimes to rest because I feel like they need that support,
Yeah.
to say, it's okay if you don't go consistently throughout the day. It's okay to get up, go on a walk, to
Mhm.
get, whatever those things are. We were on a call with an executive the other day, and she was really struggling to, she had so many things on her plate, all urgent, and I'm just struggling to get through. and she was getting ready to have a really big meeting. And we said, well, what would happen if you got up, went outside, just walked around in the sun? It was a beautiful fall day. Just walked around in the sun for 5 minutes. She's like, I never would have thought about that. And it wasn't like giving her permission because she needed our permission. It was the suggestion and also the support to say, those 5 minutes of getting a little bit of sunshine, getting a little bit of fresh air, and truly 5 minutes, like
Right.
5 minutes. So we ended our meeting early so she could go do that, and just reset.
Yeah.
It's that reset process, I think, that's so valuable.
I love that so much. And I do think, I agree with you, like, no, people don't need our permission, but I think in a way, there's so few people saying, by the way, you kind of need to recharge. I mean, I tell my kids, right, when they're freaking out, they're in college and they're like, I have to test and I have this and I have this. And I'm like, yeah, and maybe you should do nothing for 15 minutes or go do something for an hour that completely lights you up. And, people are like, what? Why would you tell them, to take a break or not study or not do the thing? And I think it's that same idea of when you try to do something all the time and you don't take a break and you don't recover, you're useless. Like, I'm sorry, but we do need that. We need that play. We need that time to re-energize. And sometimes when we stop is when we get our best ideas.
Right.
But that, like, grinding through thing, it doesn't actually work, other than it might look good to other people, right? Like, there's such a badge of honor of like, oh my God, I had a 12-hour day today. I worked so hard.
Right.
And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I know. That's a lot of unwinding, or I guess deprogramming. I still struggle with it, I know. And I mean, I think just the environment in accounting and law, like that we grew up in, it was
Yes.
all about the grind and the number of hours, and it is that badge of honor. And I think there's a lot of, at least for me, I do, even though intellectually I understand the reason for rest, I understand and I buy into it and we advocate for it all the time with people, but I still get a little bit of shame and guilt.
Same.
Still have a hard time just like, okay, I know this is what I need to do. And yet I still tell myself, you're still going to do it. You don't need to stay an extra hour and be not as productive as you would be if you would just go take a break, go clear your head, go do something. So that guilt and shame is so powerful. It's like this force that comes in, and then you have to kind of somehow put up a shield or something to say, nope, sorry, not listening to you today. But it is a practice, I guess, and that's part of the deprogramming that we're doing for people. But I think sharing that we still struggle with it too makes us human and real and relatable, which is important in this work too, because we're not, perfect and have all the answers to everything. That's the opposite. We have a philosophy and we stick to that and we believe in it and we've seen the value and we do things the Glowe way, but it doesn't mean there aren't those moments when it's just, I wish I didn't feel this way, but it's okay. It gets less and less. The voice gets louder. I mean, it gets quieter. The voice gets quieter.
It's true. And, I think it's practicing it, but I think it's also, like there's a practical side of it too, which is like when you honor your own energy and you realize, like what has helped me a lot with sort of the guilt and shame is that I realize that when I honor my energy and I work when I'm at my best, that I'm really productive. And when I don't work when I'm at my best, I'm kind of a hot mess. And so I do a lot better when I'm like tuned into myself and I know like, okay, I'm going to crank right now because I'm really, really inspired. And then when I'm done, I'm going to take a break because I'm going to come back and then be more productive. I can look at it as I'm actually doing much better work and it's much more efficient. And so people who would say, well, you better sit at your desk from 9 until 5 are like, wait, what are you doing? Why are you walking outside? They just don't understand my energy and that's okay. Right. Yeah. And so I think that helps when we're working with leaders and we're like, how do you work best? And people are like, wait, what? I never thought about it. Right. Because nobody asks that question, just like no one says, what do you really love to do? But it's so important, I think, in sustaining the motivation in understanding how to regulate your own energy, because none of us are wired to go all the time. We're
Right.
just not.
Right. I do think it's really interesting too, because so many of the jobs that exist today are thinking jobs. We're not all in manufacturing, like building something, doing something with our hands. There are still a lot of those jobs, but I think so many of the jobs are thinking jobs, and thinking about it that way. And what is the work? Well,
Yeah.
the work is thinking, problem solving, analyzing, and all those things take a lot of space, and they take a lot of energy for our brains. And so just like sometimes we have to reset our phone, or, unplug our computer or whatever, I mean, everybody needs that break from time to time, because our brains are just constantly going.
Yeah.
So thinking about work and, you know, are we actually doing the work, or are we just being busy?
Well, you know that statistic, right? 80% of time spent at work is lost every single day. 80%. So
Just a huge number,
it's a huge
especially
number.
when people still value and put so much emphasis around hours worked.
Right.
So let's assume for a minute it's a 40-hour work week.
Mhm.
So 80% of that, so 32 of the 40 hours are non-productive. So basically you're paying someone for 8 hours of work a week.
You are. And if we were talking about assembly line, right, we would never tolerate this.
No.
But in the thought work, we're
Right.
like, oh, but you're there and you're doing things, right? And so it's hard to know, but it's so interesting to me, right? Like when we're valuing sort of the quantity over the quality, that's what you get, and so you have like a lot of dysregulation where people are spending time trying to get answers to questions, and they're trying to manage their own behavior and
Right.
manage their own emotions and manage the dynamics in the workplace. Like it's not like they're sitting there. I mean, there are people for sure sitting on Instagram or whatever, but
Yeah.
that's not really what this 80% is talking about. It's literally people who are there with the intention of doing work who just aren't being productive.
Right.
Because the way it's set up isn't conducive to being productive. And that's nuts.
And I think, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning when we were talking about how do you sustain motivation. I mean, how you can be the most productive is also tied to, are you really clear on what the purpose of the company is? Are you really clear about the role that you're playing and how it's contributing to that? Because somewhere in between those two is the work that needs to get done. And I don't know how intentional that thought process is all the time. I think because when I think about, I mean, we do this and we see this all the time, right? Where we're helping people clarify their roles, and then we're looking at the outcomes of the roles, and they're working towards those outcomes. And oftentimes, I know for sure you've seen this with multiple clients, that oftentimes people haven't really thought about it in that way, because you have a goal setting, or you have a performance measurement process, and those goals, I guess they're loosely tied, but are they tied to the vision? Are they tied to the purpose of the company? Are they tied to the goals of the company? Not always, I don't think. Do you think?
I think a lot less than they could be, right? And a lot less than people think they are, because we're in this era now where it's really popular to do a mission vision, to do those statements. It's like a checkbox where a lot of companies will be like, oh, I have that, we have that. But translating it into something that's really meaningful for the people doing the work is rarely ever done. And so you'll have these broad statements of like, or words on the wall. I mean, literally, I worked with a company that had the words on the wall, but when asked, people had different ideas about what every single word meant. And it was huge disparity. And so I think that there isn't the time being put into making sure people really understand what it means, like on a granular level. So, you can say this is our vision, this is our mission, but we know that we all have different filters and different life experiences. And so what something means to me is going to be completely different to someone else unless we create some language and some common experiences to unify what we're talking about. And I think that's one of the things that's so missing, right? In trying to motivate people. If they can't connect to the vision, they can't connect to what's happening, it's hard to make them care.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really an opportunity to help people get motivated either differently or again, or, help them re-energize about their role,
Mhm.
if we could just do that. And I think so much of it comes down to how simple can you make it too? Because if I translate my role into what I need to be doing, and I know that, okay, in order for me to really shine in my role, I need to be doing these things. If I just have that to fall back on those days when I don't have as much energy, or maybe I'm just floundering a little bit, or I'm just not totally focused or whatever, it's nice to just be able to kind of look at that and say, oh, right, okay, well, this is helpful because now I can go do this. Or it just like re-energizes me. So it's almost even the vision or mission of the company, but also my contribution and what is expected of me and what my team is expecting of me, because nobody likes to let people down. But if
Mhm.
you could just kind of look at that piece of paper or look at that thing, um, and use that as a tool to re-motivate you or re-energize you. I don't know. I think that would be a really big opportunity for leaders to have that.
I I love that. I agree so much because one of the things that we find a lot, right, when we go into organizations is they're doing the work and they'll say like it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, but they genuinely don't know if they're perceived as valuable, and or if their work is valuable or how their work contributes to like the overall success of the company. So that's something that, and I think sometimes leaders like they're clear in their head but they're not articulating it and they're not sharing it, and so people are sort of like, I'm here and I'm doing this thing and I think I hear this all the time, I think I'm doing a good job. I mean, no one's told me I'm not doing a good job. It seems like I'm doing a good job, but honestly I don't really know. And
Yeah.
so it's so hard to be motivated, right? If you genuinely don't know if what you're doing adds like value in a big way, and you
Yeah.
don't really know if you're doing a great job with your best effort, or if, someone's going to come back and be like, what have you been doing all this time?
Right.
And, you're kind of feeling your energy is waning, but you're not getting that feedback and you're not clear. So I love your idea of, if people are clear on like this is genuinely like what I'm here to do and why I'm here to do it, I feel like that is something you can always come back to
Yeah.
as motivation fuel when you start to go like, what am I doing? What am I doing
Right.
again? And why am I doing
Yes,
it?
exactly. But I think you're right. Like, I mean, on the topic of sustaining, and we talk more probably about that that process of regenerative energy, and that's kind of what we're getting to here is, sustaining motivation is just creating that regenerative energy process. But I think that what you just said is another part of it, which is that feedback loop. Because it'd be one thing in my mind to be thinking I'm doing a really good job. And maybe I still have this anchor and it's sitting in front of me and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. But if I'm not getting feedback, or if I'm not getting some kind of measurement of results,
Mhm.
then I might be missing it. I mean, it might be all for nothing,
Right.
which is not good either. And
Right.
so the feedback, whatever the feedback loop, whether it's some kind of, quantitative measurement or some kind of qualitative feedback loop, both of those, I think, are part of the whole the sustainable element to the motivation loop. So
Yeah.
we've got action, aligned action, knowing what you're supposed to be doing, doing your role in alignment with that. We've got the rest and recovery. cycle, and then we have the feedback. So we kind of have, I guess, 3 parts. Would that be how we describe it?
Yeah, I think that's really
Interesting.
good.
Never thought about it that way.
I
That's
love
really
it.
interesting.
I love how you just like put things into, you're so good at like making it make sense. We like have this big conversation and then you're like, and this is what we just did. And this is how it looks. It's amazing. But I will say this about feedback. One of the things I hear a lot, and it makes me like want to, my head fly off is, yeah, I don't really know. I'm just going to wait for my review and I guess we'll find out. And for companies who do reviews once a year, like this
Oh,
is
yeah.
terrible. This is terrible,
Terrible.
right? Like that needs to stop completely. I cannot say that enough because people are, and then they don't know. And so they're just sort of waiting for that yearly review. And then right before the review, they're on their best behavior. It's like this whole artificial thing is happening around an event and they're not getting that constant feedback. So you want to talk about motivation, like 9 months out of 12, my 80% number of like
Oh, yeah.
wasted
True.
time, it probably goes up to 90, right?
Yeah,
So, but
so true.
if you're getting constant feedback, and I don't mean feedback as in like you need to sit down and have a formal, review, but just the feedback of like, this is an amazing contribution. Absolutely. Let's do more of this. We don't need this as much. Let's, like, so people know what I'm doing freaking matters.
Yeah.
They can be motivated by that. And then they know that they're on the right track. So that is motivating when they're, starting to feel a little bit tired. I think when you don't get that feedback, it's so easy to just check out a little bit.
Yeah. That is a really interesting conundrum though. So if you think about it, everybody operates on some kind of a 12-month cycle, whether it's a fiscal year end, a calendar year end, doesn't really matter. So the same cycle exists where you have the beginning where you're setting your goals for the year and this is what we're trying to achieve and everything else. And then you have an end at 12 months later. Mm-hmm. Usually around the 9 or 10-month mark, you're starting to do performance reviews. How have I done? So one of the things that occurred to me the other day was, we go through this process, leaders go through this process of strategic planning or planning for next year, whatever, and they set out these objectives. And yet I don't see, be interesting to get some data on this or your experience on this. I don't see very many strategic planning goals being achieved like in month 1 or 2 or 3 or 6. Everything always gets crammed to the end of the year. And if people's goals are tied to those, I don't know. It's just really, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, are we creating this cycle where it's not very effective to have these 12-month plans because everything gets constricted down to the last few months of the year, and then everyone starts scrambling and focusing on it, and it's a little confusing to me. And I said to a leader the other day, I said, don't you think your team would feel great if in the first quarter of the year they checked off a couple of these goals? Like, why does it always have to be, why are the goals year-long mini projects, so to speak? Because some of these things, wouldn't it be nice to just get a win, feel good about it, like, hey, I've accomplished something, it's in, and then you move on to the next thing versus thinking about everything in a 12-month period and then everybody's cramming to the end. I don't know, just seems like there's something there to be reimagined.
Yeah, I agree with you. And here's the other thing to think about, right? I mean, now we're kind of going down a rabbit hole, but I love this rabbit hole because so I think in 3-month spurts. That's my brain, right? I always think in 3-month spurts. And here's why. Because if transformation happens like within a 3-month period of time, then whatever happens next is going to be based on what was transformed and or built and or created in that first 3 months, right? Then you can be like, oh my gosh, we did this and more. So let's now, based on this, create what's next. If you're looking at 12 months, you might be selling yourself so short, right? You might be creating a goal from here and looking at something that's going to happen 12 months, but you're not giving space for something really cool and creative and amazing to happen built on progress that's happening periodically.
Yeah.
And so I think a mix maybe of, a huge goal, like for the year is fine because you need that for projections and shareholders. We get that. But having, quarterly goals or smaller goals for the team to push toward, I think is awesome. And then you don't have an artificial feedback loop, right? And then you've got compensation, which is dealt once a year, but it's not everything being pushed toward that, which again, you're being motivated by something external, which is exactly where we started.
Right. So fascinating. I have to think more about that because that might be part of this whole disrupting the process. Might be part 2 to that blog that we just wrote about strategic planning. Because I could see in your 3-month increment, because what you learn in that first part of whatever this big goal is, what hopefully you're adopting some kind of design thinking where you're basically building it, crashing it, figuring out what you learned and build it differently. But I don't know that that's inherently built in to any company now that I'm thinking about it. I'm sure there are some, but anyway, I just think that could be something for us to ponder and then come up with it's basically our view on setting goals and objectives, basically. I have to think about that. I have to put a pin in that for next time.